Namaskar. Welcome to one more episode of What Does This Data Say? Today I'm going to talk of a delicate subject, a little sensitive subject. It is not that this news is not available or doesn't appear in our media. Now and then you do hear of the issues, but what the media presents is just a summary of what the government report is. They rarely get into the analysis of such reports. More so, they don't like doing it because the government in power is also sensitive for this news to become too much of a public issue. Today I am going to talk of this report. This is called the Accidental Deaths and Suicides in India. It is an annual report and is published regularly by the National Crime Records Bureau, New Delhi. The report is available from 1967 onwards on the Crime Record Bureau's website. I have given the links of this year's report, which is 2020, as well as the previous year's report. You can download them. The accidents and suicides do not form a part of the annual crime record report of the Bureau, as these two are not considered to be crimes. Going through these reports was rather disturbing and shocking. The contents are quite sensitive, and in general it goes against the beliefs which I had regarding suicides in India. So today I will pick up suicides in India out of this report and present to you. Stay with me because the results are very, very interesting. So first I'm going to present to you the general scenario of suicides in the country from 1967 to 2020. Quickly a word about how to read these graphs. Most of the graphs which you are going to see will have two axes. There will be a green line which will have the axis to the right, and rest of the colors, red, yellow and blue, will have the axis to their left. And keep an eye on the values of the axis because the axis may keep changing from graph to graph. So right now the values do not matter. Just look at the trends. As you will notice, the red line is the total suicides in the country. The yellow line is the suicide data for men, and the blue line suicide data for women. The green line is number of suicides per lakh. So if you observe the red line, there was a period till 1980 when the number of suicides were going down. From there onwards till about 2010, 2011, the suicide went up constantly. And then there was a plateau for about 5-6 years, and again last few years it has gone up. That is point number one. Second striking feature is if you look at the figures for the men and women, in 67 the difference was very small. Over the last 40 years, this gap has widened tremendously. In fact, it has more than doubled. This speaks a lot about the pressure which our menfolk have been facing. Also, notice this small kink towards the end of the graph. I have shown it with a red arrow. The rates are going up from 2017 onwards, and you heard it right. It is 2017 onward and not 2020 onward, which is the year of the pandemic. Now I am going to do an interesting analysis. I'm going to superimpose the GDP growth of India with the suicide rate. On the red line here, this shows the suicides per lakh, the axis being on the left, and the green line is the GDP growth rate of India. The axis is on the right. This data of GDP I have taken from the World Bank. Now here if you see, in the first few years till 1980, there is no correlation of the GDP growth with the suicide rate. After that period, it just grows almost along with the GDP till we come to 2017 when the GDP started falling and the number of suicides started going up. This is a very interesting point of inflection. Same graph, more data, no numbers yet. Now I have put some of the political events on the same graph. And if you see, I have added a small circle here called the external wars. That is when we fought wars with other countries. From 67 till 1980, there was political turmoil. Indira Gandhi, the emergency, post emergency, and all that happened. In 71, we fought a war. And then the economy was going zigzag up and down drastically from more than 10% growth in 75 down to minus 5.5 during the Janata Party regime. However, during this period, the suicide rate was constantly dipping down. The general public was not concerned with the GDP at that time. There was no correlation. In the 80s, the suicide rate started to go up, and it just went up and up till 1999 or 2000. In between, you see one dip in the economy, in the GDP, which is again during the political turmoil of the Janata Dal when VP Singh and Chandrasekhar were there and India was close to bankruptcy. PV Narasimha Rao came in, Manmohan Singh was the finance minister, again the economy went up. Then again in Vajpayee time and when H.D. Deve Gowda and I.K. Gujral, there was again a turmoil, the economy went down. Again when Vajpayee was fully under control, it went up. One more war, the Kargil war, and again the economy dipped. And then from there onward, it has more or less continued in a straight line. There was a 2008 crash, that was a global crash, and then came a bigger crash, the demonetization, and thereafter the pandemic. Firstly, note that I am not saying the economy went down during the pandemic. It was already down after demonetization. Also, during the history of India, only twice has our economy turned negative. One was during Morarji Desai time and second during the pandemic. Rest all other time, even if there were ups and downs, the growth rate remained positive. Even during the 2008 global economic crisis, India still clocked a 3.5% GDP growth. Let me smooth out this data for you. Now I have only two curves here. One is the GDP growth in green and the other is suicide per lakhs in red. And both of them almost follow each other till 2017 when they go in opposite directions. So now I'm going to zoom into this area which I've been talking about. That is the period from 2014 till 2020. If you see this graph here, I have plotted here suicides per lakh in red and GDP growth from 2014 to 2020. Now the effect which I am talking about you can see very clearly. Look at 2017 when the GDP growth fell to 6.8 from 8.26% the previous year. And thereafter it kept falling till the pandemic year when it went minus 7.9. At the same time, when the GDP fell in 2017, the suicide rate started going up. 9.7 per lakh, 9.9, and 2019, 10.2, and last year in 2020, it was 11. I now divide the period from 67, that is 1967 to 2020 into four different periods. The reason being that during these four periods, the graphs exhibit a very different characteristic. So let's look at the first period, which is from 1967 till 1980. In these 3 years, I call it a young India when we were in the formation stage, where after which the processes, the constitution was there, Nehruji had died, Shastri had died, and we had just come out of a war. Here, the suicide rates have actually nothing got to do with either the GDP or anything else. It just went down. The reason I think it is the aspirations of the people were very low at that time. There were too many problems. There was poverty, hunger, there were issues of education. The aspirations were all over low. So the suicide rates kept low. Also, the difference between the men and women, if you see, it goes like a parallel track, which actually means that pressure on the family was equally divided between the men and the women. The second period is from 1991 till 2000. I call this the maturing India. That's when we were growing slowly but surely. Our GDP was on the rise. We were getting an exposure. Televisions had entered our homes. Communication became easier. There were STD booths all over the place. By the end of 2000, we had email, we had internet. So the general awareness all through this period kept increasing. With that came pressure on the society, and I think the reason for increase in the number of suicides is the increase in awareness, which brings you additional social pressures which you have to meet. The difference between men and women during the first half remained constant, but towards the end of 2000, by the time we reached 2000, they had started diverging. There was a small kink in 1996. The reason I could not really establish why at that time the suicide rate dropped, the only reason I could find that during that period the economy was down and there was political turmoil. So by the turn of the century, things became widely different. Just look at this chart, how different it is from the previous two. The first one period we were coming down in number of suicides or the suicide rate. The next one we were steeply rising, and come the century, things became flat. India was growing at a frantic pace during this period. There was growth all around and everyone was busy making his life things happen. And this led to everything becoming a sort of a standstill. Our suicide rate became constant, even though the number of suicides went up, but they were going up because of the population. Not the rate remained more or less constant. The difference between men and women started to rise here, mostly because the men started getting more under pressure. In fact, if you see the ladies' suicide rate, there was a slight drop by the time we reached 2013. And last part is 2014 onwards, which I have already discussed previously. Everything was constant, same as the previous section, except the demonetization. Come 2017, things started to change. It was not the pandemic which saw the suicide rates rising. It was much earlier. It was the demonetization which saw the suicide rates rising. So if you want to know how we compare ourselves with the rest of the world, here's a map which I have downloaded from Wikipedia. There is a disclaimer. The India boundary shown here is not what we claim to be. That error is regretted, but I am showing the map more for the purpose of the suicide rates. So here it is. India is shown in yellow, which is 10 to 15 suicides per 100,000. We compare ourselves with the US, Canada, Norway, Finland, Denmark. And surprisingly, the highest number of suicides in the world are from Greenland, which tops the charts with over 30 suicides per lakh. Now I get into the part 2 of this episode. I will now show you how the suicides are linked with the profession of the people of India. For this analysis, I have chosen the period 2014 to 2020 because in one episode, I cannot present the entire data for the last 40 years. Though I have already showed you the trends, and this data for the years before 2014 would be following the same trends as the main data. So first, let us look at farmers and cultivators. A lot has been said about farmer suicides in the country, and this is an emotional issue, especially during election period. Now this graph in red shows the total number of suicides from 2014 to 2020, and the green line shows the percentage as a percentage of the total suicides in the country. As a percentage, this has slightly gone down. However, the number of suicides have remained more or less constant. The compounded average growth rate is minus 0.21%, which is as good as zero. So nothing has changed as far as the farmers are concerned over the last 6 years. There is an increase in 2015, which I will tell you why so. And also there are two categories of farmers which are listed in this report. The first are those which own the land, and the second are those who work on leased land. The number is much higher. The number of suicides are much higher in category A, that is, those people who own the land are more prone to committing suicide than those who work on leased land. This is a very striking information. The reason why the number of suicide jumped in 2015 is because, which I could find out, there was a 2-year drought in the country. Both 2014 and 2015, the monsoons had failed. India's long-term average monsoon rainfall annually is 880 millimeter. If you see this chart, in 2014 there was a shortage of 11%, and 2015 there was a shortage of 13%. There was farmer distress during the period, and that is the reason lot of suicides happened. And needless to say, it is a matter of shame or concern for the government or all of us. This is something that we all need to think about and worry about. Next, we look at agricultural laborers. These are the guys who work along with the farmers. If you see this chart, number of suicides, which is shown in red, has been more or less steady, rather come down little bit. The compounded average growth rate is minus 4.5%, primarily due to the high value in 2014. As a percentage of total suicides also, it is more or less constant, around 3.5%. If you compare these two graphs side by side, you get a very interesting information. The farmers versus agriculture labor. The two graphs are sort of mirror image of each other. When the farmer suicide goes up during the drought period, the laborer graph goes down. The dichotomy between two sections of the same profession. This is interesting, and I am not clear of why so. One of the worst hit sections of society were the businessmen. Let's look at self-employed persons during this period. The stress on the small businessmen is very evident. These are not the big guys. These are the small street side vendors, shopkeepers, small businessmen. The rate has suddenly gone up after 2018 and is still going up. The pandemic only extended the agony. The rate of suicide in this category, however, has fallen a little bit after 2019, which means that some other category has overtaken. Let's now look at the categories in this business profession and who has been the most affected. Here is the table data for 2014 and 2020. The vendors who that time constituted this category by about 11% has gone up to 24%. Tradesmen at that time was in 2014 were 10.6%, are now 25%. Other businesses has gone down from 51 to 18, but self-employed people, they have gone up marginally to 32%. So that's how the 26% jump is today constituted of. The number of suicides in 2014 were 13,544, and in 2020 there were 17,332. So here is the most shocking data of suicides. Just look at this. These are daily wage earners, and look at the compounded annual growth rate. 15%. Right from 2014 onward, this category of people has been under severe stress. Irrespective of demonetization, irrespective of the pandemic, the suicides are going up every year on an average by 15%. This is a huge figure. And today in 2020, this category is 25% of the total suicides in the country. Does anyone talk about these people? No. No one has even any inkling of this category. So my last slide, and I think that will be enough for you guys to ponder over. Here is the summary. 2014 versus 2020. Farmers, cultivators have gone down. The growth rate is negative or almost close to zero. Agricultural labor has gone down by 4.5%. It's the self-employed people which has gone up by 4.5%, and maximum hit are daily wage earners, which has gone up by a massive 15.5%. These are the guys who need to be looked after. Why I say this is against popular belief, because I always thought farmer suicide was an issue in this country. No, it is not that much of an issue. The bigger issues are even lower rung of the people in this country, and something needs to be done to them. The percentage of total suicides in this category is now 43% as against 32% in 2014. Whether it was demonetization or the pandemic, it doesn't matter for these guys. So let's think of this all over again. So friends, that's all for today. I'll meet you again next week with some more interesting information. Till then, namaskar.